Summoners, and welcome to another ProGuides video. I'm Tia, and today we'll be looking at 10 things junglers do that laners hate. Jungle is one role in League that can completely change how all three lanes play out, so the decisions they make can easily make or break the game. This means if you don't make the right choices, you can end up being flamed when your team loses. I will be that person flaming you, so without further ado, let's get into it. These 10 things can be divided loosely into two categories. The first 5 will be more about early game pathing, while the second portion will be about how you may be messing with their waves. The first mistake we see often is full clearing the jungle, specifically on junglers that are meant to farm less and gank more. If you're playing a champ like Jarvan, Elise, or Shaco, you should be using your super strong early ganks to get a lead and snowball it hard. Most champs with strong early ganks fall off, getting easily outscaled by power farmers like Karthus, so use it or lose it. This advice isn't just for the stronger early junglers. Sure, if you're playing Master Yi or Shyvana, your best bet is generally to full clear, take dragons, and wait for your ult to force things. But even on those champs, if your laners are under their towers as you pick up your second buff, and the enemy laners haven't gone to ward, you should be looking to gank. I promise, getting an early kill top puts you ahead more than those golems will, and you'll be establishing a winning lane in the process. As I said in the intro, jungle is the most easily blamed role when things go wrong in the early game, but sometimes the laners are to blame too. That leads us to today's question of the day. What is one thing that your laners do that you hate as a jungler? I'm a support main, but when I play jungle, it has to be when laners are refusing to ward. I generally try my best to track the enemy jungler, but it's not a job one person can accomplish on their own. We all have wards! Just a couple of wards at jungle entrances can go a long way in helping me know where the enemy jungler is, so I can plan out my ganks, counter ganks, and invades without wasting my time or risking my life in the process. But what's your pet peeve? Let us know in the comments down below. The second mistake we see too much is just plain bad jungle pathing. We just got done talking about how you should be abusing your OP early champs, but if you aren't taking the right route in the jungle, you aren't going to be getting much done. This is one of the more nuanced things in the video, so you'll need to make a little mental checklist to decide how you should be pathing. Is the enemy jungler a power farmer or an early ganker? Are they likely to contest you at Scuttle? If you're playing Udyr against Skarner, odds are you can easily clear faster than him and take Scuttle crabs, relatively risk-free. But if you're against someone like Jarvan or Nidalee, there may be a scuffle for the Scuttle. We'll talk more about Scuttle crab in our next entry. Loosely identify your win conditions. Personally, I think boxing yourself into one exact win condition is an easy way to tilt yourself when things start to go not exactly as planned, which is why I use the term loosely here. Anyways, try to think of what boxes you need to check off to win once the game gets out of laning phase. If you have a comp with 4 utility champs and a hyper carry like Kai'Sa, it's probably a good idea to make sure your carry isn't shut out of the game. This doesn't mean you have to dedicate your whole entire early game to sitting in the river bush and waiting to gank, but you can start topside, path down to look for an early gank, and then spend the majority of your time on that side of the map controlling vision and just supporting the lane that way. What lane will be easiest to gank? I know we just got through talking and playing around your teammates that are most likely to carry, but sometimes their lanes just aren't gankable. Let's say that you have a Kai'Sa being supported by Yuumi, and the enemy bot lane is something like Draven and Thresh. If you try ganking that, they can easily turn the 2v3 on you, and your bot lane ends up losing harder than if you never came at all. If your top laner is Maokai or Volibear, champs with easy to land CC, you'll have a much better shot at a successful gank. And ignore the people that say ganking for a tank is pointless. If it's the easiest lane to gank, you're putting yourself ahead, increasing the odds you win jungle skirmishes, and tanks like Maokai and Volley can actually snowball a lead pretty easily in some matchups, and may end up carrying the game themselves. Next, we have forcing bad fights for Scuttle Crab. This one goes hand in hand with our last entry. Scuttle Crab is such a contested camp that it almost feels like a mini objective, with some dramatic junglers calling game over if the opposing jungler is able to net both of the initial crab spawns. To avoid those situations from happening, here are some things to keep in mind if you want to secure one of the first crabs for yourself. Think about your clear speed versus your opponents. If you're someone like Udyr or Fiddlesticks, who can clear incredibly fast, you should be able to clear 4 camps before Scuttle spawns. Be there when it does, and kill it pretty quick since you can break the shield it has. If your opponent is someone like Zac or Sejuani, who have slower clears, you're likely safe from being contested. But there are times where people take unorthodox paths just to force the fight, and in those cases, you'll have to consider the next 2 points. First, you need to measure your 1v1 potential against your enemy. Some matchups are a no-brainer. Rek'Sai can cancel Lee Sin's Q with her Unburrow just by right-clicking him, while Olaf can run down anyone and kill them in an isolated fight. But if you're on the weaker side of the matchup, or it's still a risky fight where missing a skill shot can result in a loss, and you're just not down to gamble, you want to avoid forcing a level 3 skirmish that can decide the rest of the game. The second thing to think about is what the priority looks like in each lane. Even if you have a winning 1v1 matchup in the jungle, if your laners are all pinned down under their towers, that means the enemy laners will always have first move. It's pretty much impossible to win 1v2 fights in the early game, no matter how strong your champ is, so if you don't have at least one lane with prio, do your best to predict which scuttle the enemy jungler will be pathing to and go to the other one. Even with these tips, you may end up pathing to the wrong side and come face to face with the enemy jungler at scuttle. If this happens, and you have to concede it, they may cross through mid and take the second right after. It may not be ideal, but don't freak out like the junglers we talked about before. The game is not over. You can even turn it into a tempo advantage for yourself. While their jungler goes to farm more camps, you can reset and spend your gold, giving you the upper hand if you wind up in a fight before the opposing jungler resets. Just look to force before they get the chance. Our fourth point is a pretty brief one, but it still needs to be said. Don't force ganks to happen when they just aren't possible. Whether it's because they don't pay attention to their allies' health and mana, they don't see they're recalling, or they're tilted, one of the most frustrating things a jungler can do is dying to a laner for free, even more so if they make the charitable donation of double buffs. To avoid this, simply get in the habit of actually looking at the state of the lane before you show up. If it looks gankable, communicate that you want to pay them a visit. Your allies aren't mind readers, and not everyone pays great attention to their map, so the blame isn't entirely on them if they don't react in time. The last thing we have for the portion of the video dedicated to pathing is failing to secure objectives when they are free for the taking, especially Dragon, since Soul is the most consistent way to win on a game-to-game basis as a jungler. If you have a winning bot lane and your mid isn't completely run over, the first and second dragons should be all but guaranteed for your team. If the enemy jungler is beating you to it, it means you're spending too long going camp to camp instead of focusing on keeping up the tempo and pressure you need to play for your team. That said, this point isn't just about Dragon. Rift Herald exists for the times Dragon isn't an option. If both are dead and the enemy jungler is making a play on one side of the map, you should be looking to react on the opposite side. If he's ganking top, look to set up a dive bottom or at least invade to establish vision and take some camps away. Constantly react to punish your foe's decisions, even if he's not necessarily making bad ones. So far, we've talked a lot about a lot of things you maybe knew, but didn't exactly keep in the front of your mind when playing your games. It can be easy to let things like this slip, so if you want to train yourself to avoid these mistakes consistently, I highly recommend you pay us a visit at ProGuides.com so you don't have to do it alone. Our top-tier coaches can teach you all the concepts you need to avoid tilting your teammates and throwing your games before you even get out of lane phase. We're even having a sale on subscriptions right now, so make sure you stop by and use the code RANKUP2021 for a 20% discount on your next sub. Now, without further ado, let's get back on topic. As I said before, the second portion of the video is aimed more at understanding wave management. While you may think that's a pointless skill as a jungler, remember, you're the one role that directly interacts with all three lanes. If you don't understand how waves affect priority, you might not be so good at the role. The first part of this section is taxing for no reason. While any champ can do this, the most common jungle players to do are the ones that play junglers that power clear camps like Graves, Olaf, and Shyvana. Whether it's walking from one river to the other and taking a minion along the way, or running to scoop up a wave in a side lane with all camps up, all you're doing is taking gold away from your laners. While a minion here and there may not seem like much, a gold and experience deficit means there's less of a chance your laners will have your back when you need them, since it'll be harder for them to get priority in lane. Now, all of that said, that's not to say there's never a time to touch your laner's waves. Our next entry is junglers that don't help shove a wave in after a gank. If you successfully kill the opposing laner but don't help shove the wave all the way into the enemy tower, you're actually doing more bad than good for your laner in the long term. In fact, if the wave is in a bad enough spot, they can actually end up a full level down due to how much experience they lose to the freeze their opponent can establish. This mistake is mostly focused on early game ganks, where your laner lacks both the damage and mana pool to shove a wave in all the way before the enemy laner respawns and gets back to lane, especially if they have TP. But as the game goes on and respawn timers get longer, this may not apply. In fact, you may want to do the opposite of this advice. If your teammate can 100% get the wave all the way in on their own, you sticking around just leeches golden experience from them. The next 3 entries all have to do with frozen waves. If you're completely out of the loop on League lingo, a wave is frozen when it's in the perfect position with just the right amount of minions to keep it from ever pushing in either direction. Freezing is a crucial laning skill as a laner, both when stronger and weaker than your counterpart, and killing even a single minion is enough to break a freeze. The first mistake we'll start with is ganking when your laner has the wave frozen right in front of their tower. While a frozen wave can definitely bait an opponent to overextend and net you some easy kills, we aren't talking about those situations. We're talking about trying to force a gank on an opponent when they're barely even on the edge of experience range. If you're forcing a gank hard, your laner feels obligated to react and contribute, which in almost all cases means they have to go right through a potential stacked minion wave. This is bad for 2 reasons. 1, your laner can take a ton of minion damage in the process, and 2, the freeze will almost always be broken, as you get the aggro of any minions in the area as you chase your target. While the short-term gain of picking up a kill may seem tempting, if the gank isn't successful, you may have just lost the lane for your teammate, as the wave will start to slow push to the other side and leave them vulnerable to a gank. Instead of forcing hard in these situations, let your ally naturally accrue their own lead if they can manage to secure a freeze. The next thing your laners will hate is breaking a freeze for no reason. Everything we just said doesn't just apply when your laner is actually there managing the wave. Laners that are skilled in wave management know how to set up minion waves so that they have time to recall and come back to lane to a perfectly frozen lane. What looks like free farm to you as you pass by the lane may actually be your laner's efforts to win lane on their own. In fact, you can even take this tip one step further. Not only can you avoid ruining freezes for your teammates, you can actually set them up for one. If your laner resets first and their counterpart stays to push an extra minion wave, you can catch the wave and hold it just in front of your turret's range. This causes one of 2 things. Either you secure a freeze for your laner, or the enemy laner has to overstay to shove it in. This puts them in a lose-lose situation, since overstaying means they'll either be forced to lane with low resources or take a delayed recall, which gives your laner time to roam or take a turret plate. The first 2 points we're talking about what not to do when your teammate is the one with a freeze, but this one is about when it's the enemy that has a freeze going. If you can't tell from everything I've said so far, a frozen wave is like a one-way ticket to a 1 lane, so if your laners are the ones on the bad end of it, it's as simple as taking a trip to their lane and forcing it in. Any jungler can do this, so there's no excuse to leave your teammates out to dry, even if it means delaying your jungle clear. Not only will this stop the enemy laners from piling up a farm lead, it'll also play to the even more important aspect of League, of stopping your laners from tilting. If you're a jungle main and you got offended by anything in this video, good. I want to offend every single one of you. As a support main, you better stop showing up bot lane giving that Pyke free kills, because I just want to get the diamond. I'm watching. Anyway, that's it for the video. If you enjoyed the content, remember to like, sub to the channel, and join our community on Discord. Go and make some friends, you jungle animals. Once again, I'm Tia, and I'll see you in the next one.